Believe it or not, but none of the sound effects that you just listened to during the sequence were real. None of that was recorded in camera. These were all sound effects that I downloaded from the internet. So in this tutorial, I want to show you how to achieve something like that, how to sound design your videos. And by the end of the video, you will at first know what kind of sound effects exist. That's important to know because then you know what to look for on the internet. And second, you will know how to use sound effects in your timeline so they sound good together with your voice and eventually music. And at the end of the video, I will also have a few tips for you, a few general tips on how to use sound effects so they sound good, especially if someone listens with headphones, because there the sound becomes more three-dimensional and there you really want to nail it. So I would say let's start now with the different kinds of sound effects that you have available. The first two kinds of sound effects that we have here is ambience and atmosphere, and I actually thought for a long time that it's the same, but it's actually not. Now, both of those sound effects are background sound effects, like they don't describe the main action that's happening in your shot, but they're more in the background, describing other stuff, the surrounding, the place, etc. And here's the difference between those sound effects. Ambience is there to give a sense of place. That could be, for example, street noise in a city or rustling trees in a forest, while atmosphere is there to describe the atmosphere, as the name already says, and that could be, for example, wind noise or rain. So basically, if you include these sound effects for ambience and atmosphere already in your shot, then the viewer knows or can at least guess where you are in that scene, and he also gets a feeling of that place. And that makes only these sound effects already a big extension of your overall storytelling in the shot. You don't only tell the story with what you show, but you also tell the story with what the viewer can hear. Our next type of sound effects is called Foley, and you can imagine that as sound effects that make your footage more real or brings it to life. Could be, for example, footsteps, it could be animals that you actually see in front of the camera, that could be clothing or like the sound that clothes make, or maybe putting a bag over your shoulder, etc. Like basically everything that happens in your scene where you can add a sound effect to can be a Foley sound effects. And I would actually say that these are the most important sound effects, because especially if you have a video with music, then they are really pronounced and they really bring the footage to life. And another sound effect that I like to use a lot are risers, and they exist in all sorts of variations. It's basically a tone that moves upwards slightly, and these sound effects are great to increase tension or suspension in your videos, and that's why risers are really good for storytelling. You just want to make certain parts a little bit more tense to let the viewer know something is happening soon. And good to mention, together with risers are hits, which I also like to use a lot. And hits is basically just a palm, and they are good to mark certain important moments in your video. And that's also the reason why hits and risers work really well together. A riser basically creates tension until a peak point, and then at this peak point you can use a hit to emphasize this point even more. So both are actually really good storytelling tools. And also important for storytelling are transition sound effects, which, let's be honest, in travel videos, etc., these are mostly just whooshes and so on. You know, all of that great stuff, but these whooshes are not the only transition sound effects there. Transition sound effects only mean that they make the transition between two clips or two scenes a little bit smoother. It can sometimes also be a riser, it can be certain nature sounds. What I also like to do a lot is to start the sound effects from the next clip already a second or so before, so the viewer already knows, okay, there's something new coming now, because you can hear the sounds of it already, and then you see the next scene, and that instantly makes even jump cuts look a lot smoother. And the next sound effect is drones, which is a bit irritating if you're a filmmaker, because, you know, like drones, you think of something flying in the air and making videos, but that's not what's meant here. Drones are basically atmosphere sound effects that are there to create tension or other emotions. Just search a bit around for drone sound effects on the internet to get a feeling for all the options that you have there. And our last kind of sound effects is loops and sound beds, and they are basically either melodies or drums in the background, like some sort of beats that you can also use to create emotions in your videos, especially also suspension, happiness, excitement, etc. Like there's a lot that you can do with those things. And loops, as the name suggests, are there to loop themselves. So they start in the same way as they end. So if you put them behind each other, it sounds like a continuous sound. And this is good because you can easily adjust them to the lengths that you need them in your video. But you should definitely not get too long, otherwise it gets boring. But overall, it's also a great storytelling tool. So these were all the kinds of sound effects that you find on the internet and in certain sound packs that you can download. I will show you a few sound packs later in this video as well. But I would say let's go into DaVinci Resolve now, and I show you in the timeline what you have to do so that your sound effects also sound good in regards to your voice and eventually music. In DaVinci Resolve here, it's one of my recent projects. It's not like that I did a huge amount of sound design here, but it's good to show you what I mean. So to do my sound design, I go on the Fairlight page here, the music page of DaVinci Resolve. And then here on the right side, you see the mixer, and there A1 is the audio 1 track here. And this is where I have all my voice from all clips. So I double click here on Dynamics, and then I turn compression on, as you can see. And I drag the ratio slider to somewhere between 7 and 8. That's like the sweet spot that works pretty good for me. And I also drag the makeup slider up until my audio levels are somewhere in the -12 to -6 area. Actually, they go a little bit higher sometimes, as you will see soon, but it's still okay. And this is actually important. I did most of my videos actually so that it maxed out between 0 and -1 volume, and that made my voice already sound a bit weird, a bit distorted. I like it more now if I make it a little bit quieter. So let me show you what I mean here. In the bottom right corner, you see the audio levels, and when I press play now, this is how you can use them in a good way. You always want to look for objects that are the same, or you see that it stays below -5 most of the time, so it's in the -6 area. One time it got a little bit above -5, but that's okay, it's not distorted or anything. And I do that by dragging this makeup slider up here. If I drag that down now and play it back again, so this is how you can use them in a good way. You always want to look for objects. There you see it's a lot quieter now. Now it's more in the -10 area. So let me bring that up again because I like to have it a little bit louder. And when I record in my studio, that is everything that I do with my voice. But if I have certain clips that I recorded in other locations, or when my distance to the microphone changed, etc., then I will also bring up the volume for individual clips. I can also quickly show you that here. Like, let's pretend that that would be a vlog outside and the audio is a little bit quieter than in the other clips. I would get it to the inspector here and simply bring the volume up only for this clip and play it back to see that my levels also go into the same range as it did in my studio. Of course, it's also recorded in my studio, so we don't do that here now. And after that, I adjust my music to the voice. So what you can see here is audio 3, that's the music track. And you can actually do that in the edit page as well. Like here you see that music track, and I've set it to -24 decibels because that sounds really good when we listen to that. So this is how you can use them in a good way. You always want to look for objects. You can clearly hear the music. It's not too quiet, but it is also not distracting from my voice. And aside from that, you should not copy the -24 decibels here. Really adjust the audio based on the track and your voice so that it sounds good. Use headphones for that and make sure that everything plays well together. And also worth mentioning here is that I keyframe my audio. Now here, for example, I speak. So you don't have to search all the internet for similar plugins. Then when B-roll comes or a title or something, the audio ramps up, it gets louder, and this is here done via keyframes. You can see here -25 decibels for that one. and then it goes up to only -7 decibels, so it's a lot louder then. And it's important to use keyframes for that and not just cut your clip and make one louder and one a bit quieter, because then it's like a sudden jump in the volume levels that doesn't really sound good. It's weird for the viewer. So always use keyframes for that, and that will sound a lot better, a lot smoother then. So these are the first two steps. At first you adjust your voice, then you adjust your music to the voice, and now in the third step you can drag in all the sound effects into your timeline and also adjust them to the music or the voice depending on what's over it. I usually tend to use less sound effects when I talk because it's a bit distracting otherwise from my voice. I either make them a bit quieter or it's simply less, or sometimes even no sound effects when I'm talking. But here in my intro, for example, I always have my logo animation there, and here, for example, I have a few sound effects and you can listen to that. Features and improvements that it gets with every update. You actually don't need many plugins for it. At least not as many as for Final. You could probably hear that already. The sound effects are a little bit louder than the music, not by a lot though, but that ensures that they are clearly visible. I can also show you that here on the audio page. If I play that back and you look here at the bottom right, you see that when the sound effects start, that it gets a little bit louder. So it's many features and improvements that it gets with now updates. You actually don't need many plugins for it. At least not. You see like the louder parts of the sound effects are a bit louder than the music. The rest is around the same, and that is usually a good level. But again, like, don't look at the levels here. Use headphones and really make it sound good and natural to you. So that's all the really important stuff to now to start sound designing your video. And now the next step would be to insert more and more sound effects. Could, for example, type in keyboard here now in the DaVinci Resolve sound library. Here you see laptop keyboard typing, so let's drag that in there and have a look how that sounds. Now I can hear already that the audio is definitely too quiet, so I will make it a little bit louder. Yeah, right now I'm not doing that with headphones because I'm in front of the camera here, but usually I would do that with headphones because then it's more accurate. I'll make it even louder, 15. Yeah, that comes pretty cool. Now I usually overlap my sound effects a little bit, and then I fade them in and out, and then I quickly have my keyboard shortcut here. Now, having a sound library such as the one here from DaVinci Resolve is great, but they don't always have the right sounds. And this is why I also built my own sound library here, as you can see, with lots of sound packs and also some other sounds. And this is what we are coming to now, where to find your sound effects. And this is where Epidemic Sound comes into play, because Epidemic Sound gives you a super affordable subscription that includes both great music and also sound effects. So let's have a quick look on their website what you can do there. So let's say, for example, you want to have some whoosh sound effects, then you can just type in whoosh, click on sound effects and return. And now we find all those whoosh sound effects here. So many whooshes there. Let's also give you another example. Let's say I have a scene with my motorcycle that I want to sound design. Nice and bassy. I love that. I have a Honda Rebel 500. Not bad, but also not very bassy. I just like that every time I hear a Harley or so. But that's not all about Epidemic Sound. They also have their music subscription, as mentioned before. And there is a feature that helps you a lot with sound designing your videos, which is called stems. Now, stems means basically that you get different tracks of the same music track. For example, the drums, the bass, the vocals, etc. And that allows you to decide at what point in your video you want to have which instruments in there. And that is super helpful because sometimes you have parts in your video where you don't talk, for example, and there's really nice to have vocals in there. It just sounds a little bit better then. But then you have parts in the video where you talk, and there you don't want to have any vocal sounds because that distracts from your voice. So with stems you can easily turn the voice off whenever that's needed, and sometimes maybe you also only like the drums of a certain track or another part of it, and then you can also only use that. So if you want to sound design your videos better, then that is actually a feature to look into. to with Epidemic Sound. Aside from that, they also make it very easy for you to find music over the day without wasting much time, because they actually have a smartphone app. So while you're sitting in a train or you're waiting for something, you can already listen to music from Epidemic Sound, and every time you like a track, you can simply save it to one of your playlists and you directly have it there when you edit your next video. The Epidemic Sound subscription is also only $9 per month if you want to use it only for YouTube, Instagram, etc., like for yourself, which I think is really affordable. And with the link in my description below, you get a 30-day free trial, so you can test it without any risk. But there's also another platform that I like to use for sound designing my videos, and that is Visual Tone. They have 3 packs with sound effects that you could either purchase single or as a bundle. I have of course got the bundle because I really like the sound effects from them. They have this Far East bundle, which is great if you travel Asia. There are a lot of Asian sounds in there. They have the Flight Edition, which is insane for transitions. There are all sorts of transitioning sound effects in there, plus lots of other stuff for time lapses, slow motion, and so on. And they have their original sound effects, which is good for general purpose sound designing your travel videos. So check Visual Tone out as well, especially if you're into travel videography. There you will find really good sound effects for that. I will also leave a link to that in the description below. Okay, there you find all of your sound effects, and as promised, I have a few more tips for you to sound design even better. And the first tip here is to use L and J cuts. I mentioned L cuts already before. It basically just means that the audio of the next clip already starts before the clip starts, and J cut is exactly the opposite. There the next clip starts already while the audio of the first clip is still playing, and both of those techniques work great to transition into a next shot, because then you still have the audio of another clip there, and therefore these clips feel like they have a connection, or at least the viewer already expects a transition to come soon. And another really important tip for sound designing your videos is that you should use the stereo surround tools available in your editor. That means that you can actually influence if a sound effect should come from the left, the middle, or the right, because oftentimes when you download your sound effects, they already come either from the left, right, or the middle, or they are everywhere around you. And with these surround sound effects, you can influence that. For example, if you use the pen tool in DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut, you can quickly shift the sound effect to the left or the right. So if, let's say, for example, you have a drone shot and you fly close to a tree and the tree is on the left side, then you can insert a whoosh sound effect, and you can use the pen tool to drag it to the left, so that it really sounds like it's only the tree on the left side that causes this sound effect. And in DaVinci Resolve, there's also another tool for that I like to use a lot, which is called Stereo Width, because as mentioned before, oftentimes you have sound effects that are all around you, but this Stereo Width tool allows you to shrink that into a certain angle. Like before, it was all around you, and then you can actually kind of shrink that together so that it sounds like it would only come from the front. Super nice tool that's super easy to use. You see how that works here. So definitely start using that as well. Play a bit around with that to get a feeling. And the last tip is to use your EQ to adjust certain frequencies of your clip. And that's especially useful for music that you put under your voice, for example, because there you can pull it down in the frequency area where your voice sits, and therefore you can make the music actually a bit louder, that it's more pronounced, but it doesn't feel distracting then, because then the music clip overlaps less with your voice because you lowered the frequencies there. So that's very useful, and you can sometimes also use that, for example, to enhance the bass of whoosh effects, for if it's too light sounding, for example. That's also something where I use this EQ a lot for. So much for all the tips. I actually have a little bonus tip here, which is that you should start sound designing without music, so you can actually listen fully how it sounds, because music is always a bit distracting while sound designing. So simply turn your music track off while doing that, and only do it without listening to the music at the same time. Then turn the music back on again and maybe do some more tweaks to adjust it so you can still hear it with the music. I actually did that a few months ago, where we had a challenge with Epidemic Sound, and I actually made a video about it, which you will find here in the corner. So if you want to learn more about sound designing and the importance of sound designing without music, then check that out. And if you found this tutorial helpful, then please leave me a thumbs up and consider subscribing for upcoming videos. See ya!